Welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County's Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. I want to start today by wishing you all a belated Happy New Year, a safe and healthy 2022 to everyone. I also want to mention two other things this morning before I get started, things that will be not surprising if you've listened to some of my other programs. First, I want to remind you all that our building is open. We have instituted various COVID restrictions and policies, so that we ask you to wear a mask and ask for vaccinated visitors only at this point. But our building is open, and so I hope you'll come and see the images that I'm talking about today and some of the objects I've talked about in the past in person in our museum. And as always, if you have questions during my presentation, I hope that you will use the Q&A feature of Zoom, type in your question, and I'll make sure to make time to respond at the end of the program. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about two photographs that we show in our galleries that were taken immediately after the liberation of Auschwitz. And here, let me add a word of warning. I'm going to be showing some pretty graphic photographs during my presentation today, but there is no way to avoid that when showing pictures taken from Auschwitz and from other Nazi concentration camps. But I want to warn you, if that's something that's going to be disturbing, please maybe watch this another time or watch a different Curator's Corner. I'm choosing to talk about these two photos in particular. And I'm choosing them this week because of the upcoming International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th this year. In 2005, when the United Nations created International Holocaust Remembrance Day as an international day of commemoration for the victims of the Holocaust, they chose January 27th, but it was not a random day. They specifically chose the 27th of January because it was the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army on January 27, 1945. And they chose that date that marked the end of the horrific killing center created by the Nazis, the most horrific killing center created by the Nazis, and the beginning of an effort by survivors to make a new world for themselves and their families. The UN organizers recognized the power of Auschwitz in 2005 and the fact that Auschwitz still had that power as a place where the Nazis built massive gas chambers and crematoria and murdered almost 1 million Jews. Today, most Americans have some sense about the horrors that took place in Auschwitz. There are memorials and museums like our own in Glen Cove, but there is also video testimony from survivors, bookshelves full of scholarly books, countless films and documentaries, all this material to let us know what happened in these places. But in 1944, despite efforts by Polish resistance fighters to get the word out about Nazi atrocities, most Allied soldiers had no idea that the Nazis had implemented a plan to kill all the Jews of Europe. It was the Red Army that discovered the first Nazi killing center when they arrived at Majdanek, near the Polish town of Lublin in July of 1944, where between 90 and 130,000 prisoners had been murdered. Soviet soldiers, although familiar with Nazi mass shootings, found evidence of a completely different scale of murder than they'd seen before. But they found even more evidence of Nazi barbarism 6 months later, when they pushed through the German forces in Krakow in Poland and arrived at the camp of Auschwitz, where more than 1 million people had been killed, mostly through gassing and then burned in industrial-like crematoria. 10 days before the Red Army arrived in Auschwitz, SS guards forced most of the inmates who were still alive, some 56,000 prisoners, to march west towards Germany. The Nazis also blew up the crematoria and the 2 remaining gas chambers. They set fire to warehouses of looted property, all in an effort to hide evidence of what they had been doing. But on January 27, 1945, when the soldiers of the Red Army drove into the Polish town of Oświęcim and arrived at Auschwitz, they still found ample evidence of Nazi atrocities, including 7,000 prisoners who had been too weak to leave and who had been left with no food, water, or medicine, left to die. Vasily Petrenko, then a colonel in the 107th Infantry Division that liberated Auschwitz and later a Red Army general, commented afterwards on what he remembered. He said, "I had seen a lot of terrible scenes while fighting on the front lines. I saw my comrades dying. I saw signs of German atrocities in the territories we freed, dozens of people hanged, women and children shot to death. What I saw in the camp was beyond any comparison. I saw 82 children from 3 to 14 years old racked by criminal medical experiments. I saw women and children who resembled skeletons, who couldn't even smile in a human manner. They had tears in their eyes, but they couldn't even sob." As soon as the Red Army arrived, the liberating forces, assisted by the Polish Red Cross, tried to help the survivors. The Red Army also quickly sent investigators and war correspondents to document the scope of Nazi atrocities and to prepare the first news materials for the press. Buildings were searched for evidence about the crimes committed there, documents were gathered for future trials, and photographs of the area were taken, including the two we show. These images were soon distributed and shared to publicize Nazi atrocities and to spur the ongoing support for the Allied military effort. This, for example, is a copy of the February 22nd, 1945 edition of the Shelby Daily Star, a newspaper published in Cleveland County, North Carolina. This is from 3 weeks after the liberation, but even in this relatively remote county in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the front page news in February of 1945 was about the liberation of Auschwitz. I know it's dark, but I think you can recognize that the central image on the front page of this paper is one of the photographs that was taken by the Red Army. Here's a zoomed in version, and you can make out the caption that was provided by the Soviet Union. "Thousands of martyrs have been saved at Auschwitz by the heroic Red Army. The surviving prisoners presented a frightful sight. They were exhausted to an extent that was impossible to determine their age. Shown on this photo are prisoners of the camp reduced by the Germans to a state of extreme exhaustion. Captain A. Fradkin of the Red Army's Medical Service examines one of the former prisoners of the camp, engineer Rudolf Schirm from Vienna." The wording of the Soviet caption is, I think, interesting. First, not surprisingly, they emphasize the heroism of the Red Army, highlighting that Soviet forces, acting without Allied help, liberated this camp. Second, I'm struck by the word exhaustion, rather than something like that I would say, which would be starvation. The word choice, along with the lack of any reference to the mass murder that was taking place in Auschwitz, gives the false impression that this was a labor camp like other Nazi labor camps, although where conditions were particularly bad. This false impression may well have been due to the early date of this publication and the lack of understanding about how Auschwitz had operated, but it does seem striking to me. And finally, there's the notable absence of any reference to the Nazis' targeted killing of Jews in particular, and instead a broad reference to martyrs. We know the Soviet Union would continue to underplay the Nazi targeting of Jews for the next 45 years, and instead referred to all the victims of World War II as socialist heroes, creating a misleading narrative behind the Iron Curtain about the events of the Holocaust that remained in place until the fall of the Soviet Union. In our gallery, we use different captions for these photographs, choosing instead descriptions that offer more information about the history of the Holocaust. Here you see the caption we have with the photo that appeared on the Shelby Daily Star, which we include in a timeline of events in 1944. We say Soviet troops reached Auschwitz. They find emaciated survivors and warehouses overflowing with human hair, artificial limbs, toothbrushes, toys, and other items taken from victims. We want to highlight that it was Soviet troops that liberated Auschwitz, but then use the single photo to draw attention to the scale of murder and theft that took place in Auschwitz. This is the caption we show with the other photograph. In Birkenau barracks, prisoners slept in lice-infested cramped bunks stacked 3 high. Again, we use the photo to give a wider window into the conditions in Auschwitz. Let me change tacks for a moment here and talk more broadly about photographs taken of Auschwitz. Despite the fact that more than 1 million people were deported to Auschwitz, we have only limited photographic evidence of what took place there. The prisoners certainly were not able to take photographs. And for the most part, the Nazis did not either, preferring to keep their crimes a secret. That said, we know of 4 sets of photographs taken at Auschwitz during the war. 2 sets taken by the Nazis and 2 sets taken by others. Together, these 4 sets of photographs actually make Auschwitz one of the more well-documented Nazi killing centers. One set of photographs includes 38,916 registration photographs that were taken between February of 1941 and January of 1945. I can only show a couple of these pictures, but we know that the collection is the remnant of a much larger collection of registration photographs that were taken of prisoners who survived the initial selection process and were made part of the prison population. The people who were murdered as soon as they arrived in Auschwitz were never photographed, never registered. Mostly they were marched straight to the gas chambers. But those who were chosen for forced labor went through a registration process that included getting a tattoo at Auschwitz and having their picture taken in 3 particular poses. Sometimes there are examples of people who survived, like this woman who escaped from Auschwitz only to be recaptured, but still survived the war. Overall, however, I find these pictures deeply disturbing. You can see in these photos people who are strong on the day they arrive in Auschwitz, but then you see how quickly the Nazis destroyed them and how soon they were murdered. It appears the pictures were taken as a way to help to recapture any prisoners who might escape. In the end, however, they were not very useful for that purpose because the cruel and inhuman conditions in Auschwitz, including the starvation diets and physical beatings, meant that prisoners very quickly looked nothing like the photographs taken when they initially arrived at the camp. And also because many of the prisoners were killed before they had had a chance to develop any plan to escape. Regardless of that weakness, the Nazis continued to take the photographs until shortly before liberation. As the Red Army approached, the Nazis tried to destroy the photographic collection along with other evidence of the crimes, but 2 prisoners saved part of the registration photograph collection, recognizing the value of the images to surviving prisoners or to their families. Another set of photographs taken by the Nazis in Auschwitz is known today as the Auschwitz Album. This is a collection of 193 photographs taken by an SS photographer, which capture the processing and murder of some of the Hungarian Jews brought to Auschwitz in May and June of 1944. These are now some of the most iconic photographs of Auschwitz. It's not entirely clear why the pictures were taken. They don't appear to have been taken for propaganda purposes, and they don't also appear to have been used for personal use by the SS. Most scholars believe that they were prepared as an official reference of some sort for a senior Nazi officer not on site. Whatever the original purpose, it was discovered by a Holocaust survivor, Lily Jacob, in a story that sounds unbelievable. In the spring of 1944, 18-year-old Lily was deported with her family, along with most of the Jews of Hungary. On the ramp of Auschwitz, she was brutally separated from her parents and her younger brother. She never saw any of them again. She survived, but like many survivors, she was without family or friends and felt completely separated from the world that she had known. However, on the day of liberation in the Dora concentration camp in Nordhausen, more than 400 miles away from Auschwitz, she found in a deserted SS barracks a photo album. When she looked through it, she saw pictures of her family and friends as they arrived on the ramp at Auschwitz, unknowingly awaiting their death. It was a unique collection for her. And later, she used it to also help other survivors find photographs of their family members that they would otherwise have never have known what happened to. So in these two collections, we have snapshots of prisoners and a window into the operations of Auschwitz during May and June of 1944. A third set of photographs is a collection of 4 images known today as the Sonderkommando photographs. The 4 graphic pictures were taken secretly in August of 1944 by a Jewish prisoner, usually just referred to as Alex, who was a member of the Sonderkommando, the special unit of prisoners tasked by the Nazis to clear the gas chambers and to burn the bodies in crematoria. Alex took the pictures of the murder and mass burning of bodies and then worked with Polish resistance fighters to get those images smuggled out of the camp in an effort to let the world know what was taking place in Auschwitz. They, along with the Auschwitz Album, are the only known photographs of the killing process. The final set of images of Auschwitz are the ones taken at liberation by the Russians, including the 2 which we display. But as you might guess, our 2 photographs represent just a tiny part of the effort made by the Russians to catalog what they found at Auschwitz. Indeed, even the ones we show are just single shots in series of images that were taken of the same scene, and both of our pictures actually have been cropped and edited. Here's the uncropped version of the photograph we show of the barracks in Birkenau, and you can see the full view of the building. We cropped the photo and show this portion of it, mainly because we needed a square photo to fit into a wall of photographs that we have in our exhibition. But there were other photographs taken of this same scene a couple of seconds earlier or later. Here's one that was taken a few minutes later, which shows a woman with a cane walking up towards the camera. It appears she is the woman who is standing toward the back of the scene in the photograph that we display, but who then walks up to the front of the room. And another photo, we see she's sitting down next to the woman on the central bench, who's also joined by a third figure in this picture. There's a 4th photograph in the series that fits in either before or after the last one, but which captures the scene from a slightly elevated position. And the thing that strikes me in this photograph is the sign that you can read hanging from the ceiling that says "Pfleg Kameradschaft," which translates to maintain camaraderie or cultivate friendship. The Nazis put up various signs in Auschwitz and in other camps that ran the gamut from misleading to bizarre. Infamously, the Nazis put the words "Arbeit macht frei" over the entrance to Auschwitz, meaning work makes one free. But working hard in Auschwitz didn't mean the Nazis would set you free. The sign was really just a way to obfuscate or confuse some of the new prisoners. In the barracks, there were also various signs emphasizing the need for cleanliness at Auschwitz, like on the one wall in Birkenau of a barracks where it says, "One louse, you're dead," suggesting that the Nazis wanted prisoners to fight the spread of lice. But the Nazis didn't provide proper sanitation, and they allowed inhuman conditions. And one more, also in the barracks from Birkenau, there's one which has the words "Be calm" painted in German onto the wall, even as the Nazis actively terrorized the prisoners on a constant basis. The "Maintain camaraderie" sign falls into that same genre of just ridiculous signs, in my opinion. The Nazis had no interest in prisoners creating friendships or creating camaraderie in the barracks. The Nazis saw the prisoners as workers who were to be drained of all their energy and then slaughtered. We don't show the version of the photo with the sign, but instead use an image that keeps our attention on the people, on the victims. The other picture we show also comes from a series of photographs, some of which are stills from a film that the Russians made during liberation. Here is the full image. We didn't crop all that much, just a bit to tighten the focus. But we know there are several other very similar photographs that must have been taken right around the same time. This one has a different person standing behind the central prisoner, Rudolf Schirm, and has some of the people in the background looking in different directions. Just if you compare this figure in this photograph with this figure in the picture that we show, I think you get a sense of this is obviously a different photo. There's also this full-length photo, which I think is a bit more gruesome. There's also something strange about this photo that I wanted to point out. If you zoom in on the face of the two men on the left, it appears they have been enhanced. The glasses on the doctor have been drawn in darker ink, and the face of the man behind him looks like a drawing. Perhaps it makes it clearer if you compare this photo version with this. The version on the right is the photo that we show, the version on the left from that full height photo. I don't think this is really actually the difference. I don't think it's that nefarious as it may seem, but it's more based on technology. And there's a hint in the caption of the photo that was printed by the Shelby Daily Star, which describes the image as a radio photo. Radio photo was an early effort to send photographs by telephone or telegraph. It had been originally developed, the technology had been originally developed before World War II, and was something like an early precursor to faxing or scanning. The system enabled photographs to be sent over far distances, but some of the quality of the image was lost in the process, leading newspapers who received them to sometimes touch up the images to make them clearer when they were printed. And I believe that that's what we're seeing in the version of the photograph taken by the Red Army here. Regardless, we chose an image that was not enhanced or edited. Together, the two photographs we show offer a window into Auschwitz in the immediate aftermath of liberation. But as I said, they were part of a much larger effort by the Soviet Union to capture that moment in time. The Soviet photos fall into three main categories. Some capture the buildings themselves and the grounds of Auschwitz, like this one that's a reminder that the camp was liberated in January in the middle of a brutal winter. A second category of the photographs try to capture the scale of the murder by showing piles of clothing or shoes that had been stored in Auschwitz warehouses or in processing areas. And the third category of photograph shows the liberated prisoners. The two photographs that we show fit into this third category, as we use our exhibition to highlight the stories of individuals and to remember that although we often refer to the massive scale of Nazi crimes, we always want to keep in mind that we are talking about people. We want to keep their humanity in our mind. Let me add one closing thought about these photographs. As I've tried to show, the Russians made a significant effort to share the information about the horrors they found in Auschwitz. Coming on the heels of what they'd found at Majdanek, Treblinka, and Sobibor, you might have thought that American forces and other Allied troops would have been prepared for what to expect as they moved into Germany from the West. That was not the case, however. Despite Soviet information, Americans were reluctant to believe that the Holocaust, the mass murder of European Jews, was taking place. And that lack of belief was partially due to anti-Semitism and anti-communism, which led people to believe that any reports they were receiving were fabricated. The reluctance may also have stemmed from the memory of World War I, when after the war, several atrocity stories that had been reported during the fighting proved to have been unfounded. But the lack of belief that the Holocaust was taking place was also based on an unwillingness to comprehend what previously had been unimaginable. Nobody thought that it could happen. For whatever reason, even in 1944 and early in 1945, many American leaders and members of the American public treated information about Nazi atrocities as exaggerations or falsehoods. It was only when Western allies began to discover concentration camps that American attitudes changed. The big shift for Americans came in April of 1945 when American troops liberated Ohrdruf, one of the subcamps at Buchenwald. General Eisenhower visited the site on April 12th, just a week after it had been liberated, bringing Generals Omar Bradley and General Patton. Eisenhower later wrote, "I have never felt able to describe my emotional reactions when I first came face to face with indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthlessness and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency. Up to that time, I had known about it only generally or through secondary sources. I'm certain, however, that I have never at any other time experienced an equal sense of shock." Sadly, we know now all too well what took place in Nazi concentration camps. The photographs we show are part of the evidence that helped us gain that knowledge, and we continue to use them to educate people about the events of the Holocaust. Okay, I will stop there. Thank you again for joining me. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A window. Let me, as always, remind you of some of our other upcoming programs that we've put together. I think it's an interesting collection of programs designed to engage you during the cold month of January. So it starts with this Sunday at 12:30. We're going to be holding a virtual book talk with Amy Butler Greenfield about her recent book, The Woman All Spies Fear. The book describes the life of Elizabeth Smith Friedman, a woman who was one of America's great code breakers during World War I and World War II, but whose story has largely been obscured by a combination of sexism and secrecy. So I hope you'll join us to learn about her amazing story and how Amy Greenfield uncovered it. Next Wednesday, we are holding the next meeting of HMTC's book club, when we'll be discussing Eli's Promise, written by Ronald Balson. This group meets once a month to discuss a work of fiction related to the Holocaust. If you're interested in joining our next meeting, please drop me a line. You can email me. And two other programs to mention, both of which are being held on Thursday, January 20th. The first is at 2 p.m. when HMTC is joining with the Museum of Jewish Heritage to host a panel discussion entitled Nazis on Long Island, the Story of Camp Siegfried. And the second is at 6 p.m. on Thursday, when I will be leading a virtual tour of Ellis Island that opened 130 years ago this month. You can find more details about these programs and a full list of our upcoming program on our website at www.hmtcli.org, and then click on the events tab. I hope you also consider clicking on the Give Now button and making a donation to support our online programs like this and the ones I've mentioned. Okay, let me turn to some of your questions. Somebody says the graphic photos are sometimes necessary to convey the ideas and concepts. It's sad and upsetting. I completely agree. I mean, we always struggle a little with the balance of how much graphic material to put in our exhibitions and our programs, which convey real events, but yet may be inappropriate for certain ages or be not necessary and gratuitous. What did the Russians do with the photos after the war? Frankly, the photos were widely disseminated and were used at some of the Russian trials, but were widely disseminated. Films were made also using them. All the Russians used it. It was really for during the war to use in the effort to rally support for the war. But later on, they also used that material in evidence for the trials that they held, although it was available to the Allied forces too. I'm not sure if, I assume that the Allied forces in the Nuremberg trials may also have used some of those photos. How did the Russians treat the Jewish survivors at Auschwitz? The Russian army worked rapidly to provide health services, to try and take care of the needs, regardless of the religion of any of the prisoners they found. And they also helped establish or turn Auschwitz into a museum. I think it opened by 1947. So really immediately after the war, there was an effort to make the site a memorial and museum, although the focus there was not on Jewish victims, but on all the socialist victims of fascism. To what degree did the prisoners believe the misleading signs like the Arbeit macht frei or about making camaraderie? I think that very quickly, prisoners who arrived in Auschwitz learned that the idea that work would set them free was nonsense. And I think most probably disregarded the signs. I know that when I've heard testimony from some of the survivors who work with us about when they arrived at Auschwitz, they talk about how quickly they learned what was going on and that they really were not expecting to survive. So I think the signs, they're kind of ridiculous. Would I comment on the controversy surrounding the U.S. ability to bomb Auschwitz when they were able to bomb the factories in the area around the area? Yeah, I mean, that's actually, you raise, Fred, another point. One other group of photos are aerial photographs of Auschwitz that we know were taken by Allied reconnaissance aerial photography, and that do show Auschwitz. Maybe I should have included an image like that. Whether Auschwitz should have been bombed, I don't know what the answer to that is. I feel, okay, I do. I believe they should have bombed it. But the concern at the time was twofold. One, that a concern about dropping bombs and killing innocent civilians. I'm not sure that the US Army or the Allied forces realized the conditions inside the camp at the time when they made that decision. The other concern, the one that seemed to win the day at the time, was the belief that nothing should be done, no diversion of forces or effort should be done in any way to slow the winning of the war, and that was the fastest way to save the people at Auschwitz or other concentration camps. And the fact that there were bombing missions right near the factory, right near Auschwitz and Birkenau, does suggest it wouldn't have taken much, but it would have been a diversion of some resources, as distinct from the ones that were the bombs that were being dropped on the factories. The other thing is, I think bombing the rail tracks, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that would have been a very minor inconvenience. The Nazis would have repaired it. Maybe it would have slowed the process, to some degree, but I think the Nazis would have repaired it. It would have taken a much more comprehensive set of bombing, I think, to do damage to actually stop what was going on in Auschwitz. And remember, we're talking about not targeted bombs. This would have been, like just random bombs dropping where. Were any of the photographs taken by women? I don't believe I know of any photographs taken particularly by women. It's possible that members of the Red Army, that some of the people were women, although I think the references I've seen all refer to male photographers working for the Red Army. And certainly the people involved in the Sonderkommando photographs were all women. I believe that the photographs taken by the registration photographs and for the Auschwitz album also all photographed by men. Do you know what Russia has done to help Holocaust survivors over time? That is a big question. I think the Russians don't treat Jewish Holocaust victims differently than others, but they did work to, they had trials for the various victims, trials of perpetrators that were to try and find justice for the victims. And I think they worked in an effort to help the survivors in a lot of different ways, but there wasn't a focus on survivors, Jewish survivors, being somehow the particular targets. And there was a larger effort to wipe that history away in the Soviet Union. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs. I wish you a good and healthy and happy 2022. Take care. Bye-bye.